The European Union is set to propose a phased-out ban on Russian oil imports. This will come as part of a fresh round of sanctions against Russia for its invasion of Ukraine. Now, according to diplomats, the European Commission, which commonly draws up sanctions for the bloc, is currently in the midst of preparing a text that could be put in front of the 27 member states as early as Wednesday. Several diplomats also added that this move was made possible due to a policy U-turn by Germany. Germany had initially resisted the ban on Russian oil, saying that it would drastically harm their economy. Meanwhile, the EU Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell said that Russia was strengthening its attacks in Ukraine, making it, quote-unquote, absolutely essential to create new sanctions against them. Sources also added that the Commission will propose to introduce the ban over a span of 6 to 8 months in order to give countries time to diversify their supplies. For the ban to take effect, the proposal requires unanimous backing and could still be derailed. Hungary is expected to raise a strong opposition as it is heavily dependent on Russian oil and is also close to the Kremlin. While some other countries are concerned that an oil ban would spike prices at the pump, especially when consumer prices have already shot up due to the war so far, Russia seems unfazed by the sanctions as they continue their operations in Ukraine. Russia exports 2/3 of its oil to the EU. The EU had already banned imports of Russian coal, but Poland and the Baltic states called for an oil embargo as well. WION correspondent Rosie Butchard is joining us live from Brussels. Rosie, good to see you. Some argue that the ban will have little negative impact on Russia, and indeed Moscow has withered some of these sanctions. Have the EU energy ministers considered this as part of their discussions in Brussels? Do we have more details about that?
The discussions will get underway among energy ministers from the 27 EU member states in the next few hours, and I'm sure that will be high on their minds when you're considering such a drastic measure as a ban on imports of oil. Of course, what EU countries are debating is whether it will have the impact they desire, which is to cripple the Kremlin's ability to finance this war in Ukraine, and what will be the fallout on the EU side. And certainly some of that reticence you mentioned previously from Germany, which has now expressed this U-turn, but also from other countries, including Hungary and Belgium, when it comes to sanctions on Russian energy. That reluctance was certainly around the idea that EU countries are not at war against themselves, and that should they take measures which would have a big fallout coming back to the European Union on the prices here, on cost of living, on potentially also on inflation, that is something they absolutely must bear in mind. But Eric, I think what certainly some countries have highlighted is that sanctions are not supposed to take a huge effect overnight. They're about long-term reducing that ability of Russia to finance the war moving forward. And of course, we've heard from NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. He's suggesting that this war may continue for months, if not years. So they are looking at very long-term measures now.
Rosie, the United States has expressed doubts on the wisdom of an EU oil ban. With this in mind, how will the Commission act going forward?
Well, officials in the building behind me, that's the European Commission, are busy drafting the final details of these next proposals. And they'll certainly be listening to partners in the United States. They will certainly be listening to what the energy ministers have to say of the 27 EU member states later today to try and work out the best way to move forward with this. And I think, Eric, those doubts and concerns that you mentioned there are really part of why we expect the European Commission to come forward with the proposed phase out of Russian oil imports rather than an overnight ban, which is what Ukraine has been calling for example. So trying to mitigate the impact straight away, particularly on the markets, but rather phasing out those imports toward the end of the year, and potentially some exemptions for countries that are most reliant. For example, as you mentioned, Hungary might be expected to otherwise veto these latest sanctions proposals, which we're expecting in the coming days. If Hungary vetoes them, then the sanctions simply cannot move forward, as they need unanimous backing from all 27 member states. So that's certainly high on the agenda here in Brussels, trying to work out a way, a kind of a middle road there between crippling that ability of the Kremlin to finance the war moving forward by banning oil imports, but also doing so in a fashion that mitigates the risks and the impacts on the European Union markets.
WION correspondent Rosie Butchard, thank you very much for your insights and for talking to us live from Brussels. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.